Hello and welcome back. Now previously we've looked at how to design and build your AWS multi-account strategy using AWS Organizations, Organization Units and SCPs, Service Control Policies. In this video, I want to introduce you to AWS Control Tower, which is an orchestration and governance tool that will allow you to design, build and deploy your AWS accounts and your AWS Organization service following AWS recommended best practices. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive on AWS Control Tower. So what is AWS Control Tower? Well, it's an orchestration and governance service that will help you define your AWS multi-account strategy using tools like AWS Organizations, AWS Service Catalog, and the AWS IAM Identity Center, what was previously known as Single Sign-On, on the AWS platform. AWS Control Tower is this overarching service that will enable you to orchestrate and design your multi-account solutions and your multi-account environments following AWS recommended best practices. With AWS Control Tower, you can easily follow AWS recommended best practices to design your multi-account strategy in accordance with some of the key concepts we discussed earlier in this section of the course. We spoke about, building various accounts for shared services and isolating them from other accounts that were focused more on your different types of workloads that you were deploying on your AWS accounts. The AWS Control Tower service can help you define and design your org structure in a much more efficient manner. The AWS Control Tower helps you to define what is called a landing zone, which is a well-architected multi-account environment based on AWS recommended security and compliance best practices. A landing zone is ultimately a set of blueprints that AWS has designed for you to help you get started with your multi-account strategy. Let's take a look at some key features for your AWS Control Tower. So obviously there's the landing zone, which is a well-architected baseline multi-account environment that's designed for you to get you started, upon which you can further add more accounts and organization units. You then have controls, which are also known as guardrails. Now, these are similar to service control policies in that they provide governance to your AWS environment and comprise of preventative, detective, and proactive controls. There's an account factory, which is a set of configurable templates that will enable Control Tower to automate the account provisioning and enrollment of new accounts for governance. And the Control Tower service comes with a dashboard that allows you to gain an oversight into your landing zone with centralized administrative views across all of your accounts, organization units, guardrails, and policies. Okay, so let's take a look at how Control Tower actually works. Now, in order to use Control Tower, you will need an AWS account. So if you're starting from scratch, you'll need to create an AWS account and configure that account with multi-factor authentication. If you have an existing account, you can bring that account under the governance of Control Tower, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But if you're building a Control Tower or a landing zone from scratch to start off with, then you'll be building a set of base multi-accounts in your AWS organization under the governance of Control Tower. When you use Control Tower and configure your landing zone to deploy your multi-account environment, at a very basic level, you will have certain accounts and OUs in place. For instance, you will have the security OU within which two accounts will be created, the audit account and the log archiving account. In addition, you will also have a sandbox account created for you. Now, this OU will be empty. There will be no accounts within it, but ideally you want to use this for your testing purposes and experimentation work. Control Tower also integrates with the Identity Center, and the sources of those identities can either be from the ones that you create within the Identity Center itself, the previous single sign-on service that we had, or from SAML 2.0 or even Microsoft Active Directory users. In addition to that, Control Tower also deploys a series of guardrails in the form of policy documents that formulate as part of your preventative guardrails to disallow certain API actions. And these are positioned and deployed against your OUs within the multi-account environment that's been built for you. Furthermore, AWS Control Tower also works with AWS Config and Lambda to deploy certain detective guardrails that will enforce governance and compliance within the various AWS accounts in your multi-account environment. Now, when it comes to actually configuring Control Tower, at this point in time, what we're looking at is building a landing zone from scratch. There are actually two options of setting up Control Tower. The first one is exactly what we've been doing so far. So we have launched Control Tower into a new organization using Landing Zone to build our baseline multi-account strategy with some specific accounts, as you can see on the screen. Another method of using Control Tower is to actually launch Control Tower within an existing organization. And you do this by registering your existing organization, or what we call extending governance to that organization. So in the case of the Vacant Studio, which we've been discussing so far in this series, we already have certain AWS accounts. We even have an AWS organization configured. We can actually bring that organization, the OUs and the accounts that we've previously created, under the governance of Control Tower. And this allows us to therefore ensure that, if you're one of those customers who is already in your journey on AWS and have deployed certain accounts, you can still bring those accounts and any OUs that you've configured under the control of Control Tower for better management and governance. And ultimately, you would be registering those OUs and enrolling those existing accounts under your AWS Control Tower to be able to be governed by Control Tower itself. Okay, we've looked at exactly how Control Tower works. Now, probably the best way to really get some experience in using Control Tower is to actually get into the console and configure Control Tower itself. So we're going to be doing that next. Okay, before we actually get into the AWS Management Console and set this up, I wanted to revisit the Vacant Studio's AWS organization that we've been working with across this section of the course. Now, previously, we've built an organization. We have configured 3 separate accounts: a management account, a development account, and a production account. And we also have those 2 OUs in place, the development OU and the production OU. When you're setting up Control Tower, as I've mentioned earlier in this video, there are 2 ways of doing that. You can either build Control Tower and configure it in a brand new AWS account, and then deploy your landing zone and start from scratch. Or you may be in a situation where you already have some accounts, and maybe you've even deployed an AWS organization service and you want to bring them under the governance of AWS Control Tower. You're going to come across a lot of clients in the real world where they already have some workloads running on AWS. They just haven't necessarily configured everything according to best practices. And that's where you're going to come in as a consultant and basically help them adapt the more best practice methodologies that AWS recommends. So you want to bring the existing OUs and the existing accounts into and under the governance of a Control Tower configuration. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this particular lab. Now, when we actually configure Control Tower for an existing AWS organization, we're obviously going to be deploying the base landing zone, which is the well-architected multi-account baseline configuration that's going to set up some additional OUs like the security OU and the sandbox OU, and also deploy the audit and log archive accounts at a bare minimum. Next, we're then going to register the existing OUs that we have in our Vacant Studios AWS organization, which is going to enroll those dev and prod accounts under the governance of Control Tower. Now, there's some prerequisites to actually continue this configuration. You're going to need an additional 2 email accounts. Now, you can actually use your Gmail account to create various email aliases for the various AWS accounts you plan to deploy, simply by adding a plus sign followed by a combination of words at the end of your username, but before the @ symbol. Okay, so for example, if your Gmail account is mycompany@gmail.com, then your audit email alias could be mycompany+audit@gmail.com, and your log archive could be mycompany+logarchive@gmail.com. Now, I mentioned about how you can use Gmail to actually build out multiple email aliases in section 1 of the course, but hopefully you're now beginning to get the gist about how you can use one Gmail account to allow you to have multiple email aliases for the various AWS accounts you go on to create throughout this course. Okay, enough of me about telling you how this should all be working. Let's jump on into the AWS Management Console and set this up. Okay, here we are on our AWS Management Console for the AWS Management account that I'm currently running within the Vacant Studios environment. Okay, so we're just going to go into Control Tower. And this is the Control Tower dashboard to help us set up our multi-account environment and allow us to govern that environment. So on the right hand side here, you've got Set Up Landing Zone. You just click on that. And you're going to come across a series of steps to follow in order to build out your Control Tower environment. So right at the top there, we've got Control Tower for existing AWS organizations. Now, if you set up Control Tower for an existing organization, you can expect a certain set of configurations. Okay, so Control Tower will have the necessary permissions to govern all of the organization units and the accounts within the organization infrastructure. Control Tower will not extend governance to existing OUs and accounts. Instead, you will see landing zones that contain resources managed by Control Tower, and they are set up in parallel to your existing AWS organization infrastructure. Now, what we're going to do is, once we've deployed Control Tower and the landing zone, we're actually going to bring in our existing OUs into and under the governance of Control Tower. And I'll show you how we do that shortly. But we need to just follow through a couple of key elements over here. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is the home region. This is one you want to remember for the exam, and that is that you cannot change the home region after setting up your landing zone. So you need to be careful about what your home region is. I'm going to leave it at US East North Virginia. Okay, I'm going to leave it there just as a default settings. But obviously, if you have a different home region where most of your operations and workloads take place, then you want to change that. The region deny setting is where you can basically configure the ability to deny access to AWS services and operations in any region, showing the Control Tower status of not governed. So you can set that configuration up as well. I'm just going to leave that at the default at the moment. And you've got additional AWS regions for governance. So you can include additional regions that will fall under the governance. Because the Vacant Studio is an international company, I'm also going to go in there and put in another region, specifically the London region and the Paris region. Okay, so those are the additional regions that I'm going to include as part of the regions for governance. So we click next, and we then come to step 2. Step 2 is where we configure organization units. Now, the landing zone has a set of blueprint configurations that it's going to go through. So one of the OUs that it wants to create is the security OU. This is the default OU name for your shared accounts. And under this OU, you will have 2 accounts created, right? The audit account and the log archive account. There's also an additional OU that is configured for you. This is optional, but we'll leave it in place. We'll leave it at the default settings. And the sandbox OU will get created for you, which you can use for all of your experimentation work. So I'll click next. Step 3 is where we actually define the parameters and the configuration details for those additional 2 accounts that are going to be created. So it's going to create a log archive account. So I need to supply an email address for the log archive account. So let's just do that next. Okay, log archive at thevacantstudio.co.uk. Next, we'll set up the audit account, and this will be audit at thevacantstudio.co.uk. Okay, and we'll leave the account name at audit, and then I'll click next again. Okay, now step 4 is where we have some additional configuration information and details to provide. So I'm actually going to leave step 4 at its default configuration. There's a CloudTrail configuration where basically Control Tower aggregates information from all of the accounts into the organization trail and delivers the logged information to a specified Amazon S3 bucket. The file path contains the organization ID as a prefix, and we're going to leave that at enabled. With regards to the actual log configurations, this is an optional setting. I'm going to leave those at the default levels in terms of the retention of those logs. So we'll leave those as they are. And next, you've got KMS encryption. Now, KMS encryption will help you create and manage cryptographic keys and control your resources in Control Tower. You can set this up as well if you've already starting to look at KMS and encryption across the board for your AWS resources that you're deploying. Okay, but I'm going to leave those at their default settings. So click next. And this is a summary page of how our landing zone will be configured, right? So we've got US East 1, North Virginia being the home region. We've got London and Paris as our additional regions. The foundational OUs will be created. The management account will be the existing account in which we're deploying Control Tower, which is master at thevacantstudio.co.uk. And then obviously Control Tower will be provisioning the log archive account and the audit account using the account factory. And finally, there are some additional configurations which pretty much we've left at the default settings. You need to tick this box that says, I understand that the permissions Control Tower will use to administer AWS resources and enforce those rules on my behalf. You can actually take a look at those permissions that Control Tower is going to need in order to access your accounts and all of the resource provisioning that it needs to do within your AWS environment. So we'll go ahead and click Setup Landing Zone. And this process does take a bit of time, close enough to an hour or more. Okay, so you want to just let it run and do its thing. And what you're going to get is this little progress bar over here that needs to go up to 100% to complete. So I'm going to pause the video over here, and once we get to 100%, I'll restart the video and we'll continue from where we left off. Okay, so the good news is that the entire process completed successfully. It did take a bit of time. However, our landing zone is now available. We've got 2 organization units, one for your shared accounts and one for accounts that will be provisioned by your users. That's referring to the sandbox OU. We've got 3 shared accounts that have been created. So that's including the management account. AWS has gone ahead and created the log archive account and the audit account. A native cloud directory with pre-configured groups and single sign-on access. And in addition to that, 20 preventative controls to enforce policies and 3 detective controls to detect configuration violations. So this is the baseline architecture that has been configured and deployed. Now, if I actually take you to the organization tab over there in the menu bar, you will see a breakdown of the organization for my Vacant Studio. So there's the root OU, okay? And you can see that there are 4 separate OUs there. There's the production OU and the development OU, which existed prior to us configuring Control Tower. And then there's the sandbox OU and the security OU, which were configured by Control Tower. You will also see that organization units registered, only 2 of 4 are registered. So there are 4 organization units, 2 that existed prior to setting up Control Tower. Obviously, they were not registered by Control Tower. We need to do that subsequently to bring them under the governance of Control Tower. And within those organization units are accounts. Okay, so when you look at the accounts that are enrolled, only 3 out of the 5 accounts that exist in this organization have been enrolled. The 3 enrolled accounts are the management account, the log archive account, and the audit account. And obviously we will want to enroll the production app account and the vacant development account, which we had previously configured. So hopefully you can see what we need to do next. We need to get these accounts enrolled and these OUs registered under Control Tower. Now, before we do that, I also want to quickly show you my mailbox. And you will see that there are several emails that have come through when you're setting up Control Tower. Okay, so this one is, where we've set up the Control Tower audit account. This is an invitation for the management account to come under the governance of Control Tower. So I'm going to click accept invitation there. Okay, and in fact, that's going to take you to the portal and allow you to set up a password for the root account of the management account. Okay, so I'll just quickly do that and click set password. So my password has been created for master@vacantstudio.co.uk, and it's coming under the governance of Control Tower. Okay, and then we can try and log in as that account. Okay, and what you will notice is that I'm able to connect into the audit account, the log archive account, and the management account, because these are the accounts that are managed by Control Tower. Okay, let's just go back to my emails very quickly. A few other emails have come through. This is the log archive account being set up. This one over here is some notifications with regards to the aggregate security notifications that will be sent to the audit account. And another one there as well. Okay, so there will be certain emails that will come through that you will need to accept and review, and then you can go back and configure your environment. Next, what we need to do is we need to register the production OU, the development OU, and enroll those accounts in those OUs. Now, before we do that, we do need to log in as an IAM user that has sufficient permissions, and I want to talk to you about that next. One of the things that you need to do in order to register an existing organization is be logged in as an IAM user that has a sufficient permission and right. And I'd like to point you to this article, which is available in the description box below or in the resources section of this video. So when it comes to actually registering an existing OU under Control Tower, you need to make use of an IAM user identity or role, okay, that has the necessary permissions on the appropriate account factory portfolio. And I'm going to show you where that is in a second when you perform the register OU operations. Even if the user has full administrative permissions as an IAM user, that user still needs the correct permissions within the account factory portfolio in order to be able to configure Control Tower and register those OUs under Control Tower. So the particular user that we're going to be using to set all of this up is Alice. Now we've previously created Alice, so I just want to quickly show you who Alice is. So if I go into IAM, this is in my management account. Obviously we've worked with Alice before, and Alice is just a standard IAM user that has full administrative permissions. So let's just take a look at Alice. There she is. Okay, and as you can see, she actually has full administrative access permissions. However, she will not be able to perform that operation to register OUs to the Control Tower until and unless we give the necessary permissions within the account factory setup. Essentially, what we need to do is we need to ensure that Alice has the appropriate account factory portfolio permissions, okay, so that she can perform the registration of the OUs in the Control Tower. Now, the way we do this is we need to go into a service called the AWS Service Catalog, and within there, into Account Factory, into Control Tower, Account Factory Portfolio, and then configure and grant access to Alice to perform these operations. So let me just take you to Service Catalog. Okay, and I'll open that up in another tab. And you'll see that we have the local portfolio, which is the AWS Control Tower Account Factory Portfolio. If we just click into that, and then what we need to do is we need to click on AWS Control Tower Account Factory, okay, and click on Portfolios, and this is the AWS Control Tower Account Factory. If we just go into that, next click on the Access tab, and you will see that there are currently 2 principals that have access. What we want to do is we want to grant Alice access. So we're going to select Alice as the user, and we're going to grant access to Alice. Okay, at this point in time, Alice has the necessary permissions to register those OUs in Control Tower. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to quickly close these windows down, log off and log back in as Alice. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly grab the account ID from my management account and click sign out, and then I'm going to log back in as Alice. Okay, and the user's name is Alice. Okay, and we're now logging in as Alice. Okay, so we'll go back to Control Tower and click Control Tower, and we're going to go ahead and register those OUs. So if I go back to Organization, OU needs to be registered. So let's do the development one first. So I'm going to click Action, Register Organization Unit. And what's going to happen is it's going to say, right, this organization unit has a child account called Vegan Development. That's going to get enrolled as well. It's going to run through some pre-checks and some control inheritance. It's going to configure some manual controls as well. And I need to tick this box that says, yes, I understand the risks and expectations. Now, this is going to take a little while, so I'm going to pause the video here again and then come back once it's done. Okay, so the good news is that the development OU was registered successfully, and we have got now 3 out of 4 organization units registered and 4 out of 5 accounts enrolled. So if I expand the development OU, you will see that the Vegan development account has now been enrolled. Also, you will note that I have an email inviting me to join the IAM Identity Center, and this is for the root user account of the development account. So I'm going to click accept invitation there. Okay, and just define a new password for the root account of the development account. Okay, and just set that password as well. So that's that one configured and ready to go. Okay, so now there's an IAM Identity Center user created for the root user account for the development account. And you can see that the Vegan development is now available as well. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to repeat the same process for the production OU. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and register the production OU as well. And obviously that means that the production app account is going to get enrolled as well. So we're going to tick that box down there to say I understand, and I'm going to click register OU. This is again going to take a little while, so I'll pause the video here and come back to you once it's done. Okay, and we're back. So as you can see, the actual registration of the production OU has now completed, and the account within the production OU, the production app account, has been enrolled. So I should have received another set of emails, and there we are, basically inviting the production app root user account. So we're just going to accept that invitation and set a password for the production account root user. And that is all set. So at this point in time, my existing OUs have been registered under Control Tower, the existing accounts have been enrolled, and we have been successful at enabling AWS Control Tower for existing AWS organizations, configuring existing accounts to fall within the governance of Control Tower. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to close these tabs here very quickly and just take you back to the main dashboard. Okay, and on the main dashboard, a couple of things that I wanted to quickly show you. If you click on dashboard itself, you will see that we've got an environment summary with 4 organization units, 5 accounts, and also some additional parameters defined here. So non-compliant resources, this is basically when you create your policy documents that you want to enforce across your accounts and OUs. If there's any resource deployed that is non-compliant with those policies, they will get listed over there. These are the registered organization units. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed this particular session with me. Hopefully you're able to see how you can actually set up Control Tower for existing organizations and bring in existing OUs and register them under Control Tower governance, as well as enroll your existing accounts within your overall multi-account architecture and your multi-account deployment strategy. Okay, and that brings us to the end of this video. I'll see you guys in the next. Thank you.